All right, very excited to be joined with our first guest ever here on the Play-by-Play by Lyndsey D'Arcangelo, a contributor off announcing, a longtime reporter and analyst on the WNBA, and an author as well. Lyndsey, you wrote a piece very timely for us here. We appreciate that on this topic, which is basically we're going to do our best in 15 to 20 minutes to get through some of the lessons and takeaways we might be able to have from Caitlin Clark's arrival in the WNBA, the uptick in attention around that online, in the TV viewership, and kind of everything else. And you referenced a quote from Cheryl Reeve on Sarah Spain's Good Game podcast over at iHeartRadio. Why don't you just walk us through kind of what Cheryl, the head coach of the Minnesota Lynx, who is, in the playoffs right now, trying to lead her team to a championship, said, and maybe that can be a jumping off point for some of our conversation today. Just your takeaways on how she kind of spoke about this massive season, this massive year in the WNBA.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't so much about the growth and the attention and all of that. It was more about the toxic discourse that we've all seen taking place. Those are two separate things. I really, it's funny that you guys asked me on to talk about this because, just seeing some discourse this morning and what's happening going on with Dejanay Carrington and how she's being portrayed is the perfect example about this. Basically what I wanted to write after I heard what Cheryl had to say about the discourse and how pretty much it's disheartening. It's disheartening after covering this league for a very long time and knowing where it came from to where it is now and how it has all been a collaborative effort to just increase its visibility, to legitimize what the players are doing now and what the players who have done in the past, all of it, to legitimize all of it, right? That's not saying that there wasn't constructive criticism, that we weren't holding the league accountable. It was all that, but it was done in a very respectful manner. Hot takes and opinions were challenged, but it was devoid of racism, misogyny, homophobic rhetoric, all of it. That was not a part of it. We had trolls, of course, but these were the guys who were bored and typing, go make me a sandwich. I mean, you can deal with that, when it starts to become what it has become this season. There's something so insidious about it. It's disheartening is probably the best word. And I wrote something from my own personal point of view of how I felt or saw it unfolding and how it affected me personally as somebody who has covered this league and felt very welcomed and respected and a valued voice. I have never used my block button on X more than I have this season. I've always been the type of person to be like, if you got something to say and you're willing to argue or not even argue, but have a discussion in good faith, by all means, share your opinion. But when it starts to go down this road of disparaging comments and verbal abuse, what are we doing? I just appreciated what she had to say, not only about the toxic discourse, but then where can we go from here? And that's what I wanted to write about.
Lyndsey, I'm wondering how you process this season for the WNBA, because on the one hand, you have unprecedented growth, unprecedented popularity. And on the other hand, it's almost like a be careful what you wish for, because like you said, it does bring a lot of this toxicity and bad faith discussions and, silly arguments on First Take and whatnot. I'm just wondering how you process all of that, and if it is a example of being careful what you wish for.
I mean, I guess so. But why should we accept a lower standard just because the league's more popular? Make that make sense to me. People are saying, well, and now it's like the NBA and this is what the NBA deals with. Well, good for the NBA. Why does that have to be what the WNBA deals with? Why do women's sports leagues have to accept the status quo just because they're more popular now? I don't believe that. A bar was set, right? As far as, how this league should be talked about, how the players should be respected as athletes, all of it. So why not accept everybody else to rise to that bar rather than lower it down? That doesn't make sense to me. And I believe it can exist that way. I mean, this whole this or that, why does that have to apply? Like, just because we're popular now, we have to accept, lower standards. No, it doesn't have to be. Who said that? Who made up that rule? Just because it's good for business, does that mean that we accept all this horrific rhetoric? Will that really take away from the business side of things? Honestly, what Caitlin Clark has done is amazing. She is a generational player. She is a player that this league has needed. They needed a season like this. We've seen it in men's sports. We've seen it in men's leagues constantly, right? Where you have certain seasons, certain players come in. Michael Jordan. I'm not comparing Caitlin Clark to Michael Jordan. I just want to say that. But those type of players who can just change the game and then bring all this extra attention and fandom. She is doing that. We needed this moment to move forward, to evolve in women's basketball. That's great. You can have that be true and not, take away from what all the players have done before her and how this league was built. I know Shannon Sharp said you said First Take that all the old guards and how this league was built. Well, what does that have to do with Caitlin Clark? I'll tell you what that has to do with Caitlin Clark. There would not be a league for her to play in if they didn't do what they did. So can it be like, yeah, let's give them all the credit in the world and let's give Caitlin for taking that baton and to the next level. Let's embrace all of it. I don't like the division that is being sowed by parties who are doing it for clicks and engagement. And, I'm very, I don't even know what the right word is for this, but I'm very almost dejected by what I'm seeing as somebody who has covered women's sports for a while. And I honestly don't know. I don't know how we shift out of this when it has gotten so deep, other than we need a break. I've enjoyed this WNBA season so much. There's been so many incredible performances, record-setting, individual teams. This could be Diana Taurasi's last season, Asia Wilson and what she has done. And yet we are still talking about the same things that were talked about at the beginning of the season.
Absolutely. I mean, just to, I guess, lay the foundation a little bit, this season also saw a 6x increase basically in the TV rights deal that was negotiated. We're headed toward a likely opt-out of the collective bargaining agreement. TV viewership is way up. At the same time, I want to draw attention to a quote that I saw. There was an in-depth piece on Ad Age, which is not a place I'm often reading, but it was about the WNBA and kind of how ESPN and ABC are approaching the postseason. And this quote stuck out to me as an example of, I think, the frustration that comes from that old guard you mentioned that Shannon Sharp had some words for, Lyndsey, but also media like yourself who have been doing this for longer. And he said to I can't remember the reporter, I'll say it in a moment. We paid next to nothing and got so much value over the last couple of years. The bill is coming due now that advertising competition is rising with the intensity of competition in the league. Basically, this article laid out how the league is charging more, or the ESPN and ABC are charging more for ad rates for this postseason in the WNBA than they do for MLB playoff games. And they're getting it, and they're sold out. Mm-hmm. Even with the Fever potentially being 2 and out, mm-hmm. Caitlin might not even be part of this whole thing, and they're still getting this. But I just thought that it's a small quote, but it is exactly the frustration that you hear from tons of these people. It's not only that Caitlin Clark did all these things, but there was a threshold that wasn't being met, even if you just looked at value and very cut and dry, financial and economic terms, that she got them to. Yes, because there was some permission given to now go ahead and do that on the parts of these businesses. But that credit being given to her, I think, is one of the problems. And we can zoom out from ad sales and just look at it as attention, just care, treating the sport like something that mattered. And I think we see this a lot, right? We see this in all walks of life. The people that kind of are in charge, like a Stephen A. Smith. I mean, he's not in charge of sports media, but he's the closest thing to it. He sets the agenda, the tone, the format of how these things are talked about. In order to justify his own ignorance of this stuff for a long time, he has to tell you it didn't matter before, right?
Yes.
And that's what we saw in First Take in May when him and Monica McNutt and Shanae Agumike kind of had it out a little bit. And you hear it on Colin Cowherd's show. He often says, he gives himself credit for covering it, and he says, but the product's gotten better. It's more watchable now. I want to see it. And it's not really true, and there's no evidence given, but it's just, well, I wasn't paying attention, so therefore it must not have mattered. You know what I mean? Because I'm Colin Cowherd. I'm Stephen A. Smith. I know what I'm talking about. You know what I mean? And so I think that that's a huge dynamic that we've seen. And it's funny you mentioned Cheryl Reeve. I wrote an article or kind of after that blow up with Stephen A. and Monica that I interviewed Cheryl in 2021 for a story for my previous job about sports media and women's sports media in particular. And the thing that really opened my eyes, that the way that she put it was, yes, there is always going to have to be, when you're convincing ESPN or Amazon or anybody else to pay for your broadcast rights or whatever it might look like, that you have to get the average sports fan, men, white dudes, older white dudes, to watch. You got to. That's just part of, there's too many of that type of person that you can't ignore it. But what she said is like, look at the numbers of young women sports participation. Girls who play softball, girls who play volleyball, girls who whatever. That's going up over time a lot. And, not even 8-year-olds, but what about 15-year-olds? What about 22-year-olds? That group, that metric never gets measured really when we're talking about this stuff. And I think when we start to think about like, how do you say no to just getting swallowed up by First Take or The Herd or the normal nonsense that we cover on Awful Announcing? It's like, how do you tap into some of those audiences that don't even get factored into the discussion? And that's probably the people who, are being awakened the most when you see some of these viewership numbers go up, or even attendance in all these places. I don't know the answer. I kind of have a feeling and an unfortunate feeling that like maybe WNBA and women's sports media I don't say this with criticism, but they weren't ready. The league wasn't ready. Sports media wasn't ready. There weren't these things stood up to say, let's have these conversations. So First Take just gets to set that agenda like it does with everything, even if that's probably not the healthiest place to have that happen. But, I guess, Lyndsey, what do you feel like, what goes through your mind when you kind of do look forward? One, in the short term of just, how do you said we need a break, but does a break solve this, or is it just we stop arguing for a while and we go right back to it? And then I guess longer term, like, what would you kind of like to see that evolution look like?
Well, just I want to agree with something. Like, I do believe that Caitlin Clark should get a lot of credit for helping bring more eyes. I mean, her style of play, there's a lot of growth that needs to happen with her. I believe from a maturity level standpoint, I'd love to see her not lose her cool as much. I think becoming the face of a league is a bigger responsibility than she maybe realized. And she has said and done everything right up until this point. But I do believe there's going to come to a point, it's going to come to a head where she's going to have to be more vocal, especially in this league, when the players themselves have used their platforms and their own autonomy to enact change. And they are the reason this league has evolved and become what it is today. From a diversity standpoint, from, speaking out when it comes to politics. I'm not saying she has to go and do those things, but she's going to have to find her footing and where she fits into that, which will come in time, no doubt. But here's where historical context matters, right? There were lots of factors working against the WNBA that people don't talk about. They don't talk about it on First Take. They don't talk about that. There's an article that came out, I believe it's Sports Media Watch. I just read it before hopping on here with you guys, but there was an exec who didn't want to put the WNBA on ESPN because he didn't watch it. He didn't watch it. So like you said, with Stephen A. and Shannon, they think what they believe is canon. That a lot of people view or have the same perception. So because this exec didn't like women's basketball or what it was, didn't enjoy it for whatever reason, fine for him. But for him to be making those decisions to take away viewership and potential growth because he didn't want to put him on television, that has nothing to do with the product. That's a personal opinion weighing into a business decision. And I can tell you with certainty, he's not the only one. There's been factors and incidents like that throughout this league's history. And that's why I say historical context matters. You have to factor in it all. You can't just talk about the league like it just blew up today. When have we ever talked about sports leagues ever? Especially on the men's sides, where you're just holding it to what it is today. To answer your question about going forward, I do believe there's enough people like me who will continue to use their voice and to try to do it with integrity. I tweeted about this morning. I refuse to play this game where, you write headlines, you aggregate content, you produce clickbaity stuff, and that's considered journalism. Maybe it's me and it's my age or haven't been around women's sports for a while, but I don't want to compromise my integrity. And I feel like there needs to be more of us to take a stand and to do it the right way. I don't know how else we shift out of it. Monica McNutt held Stephen A. accountable. Has she been back on that show since?
She has.
Has she appeared?
Have a little bit of context there. She has not. But I actually have spoken with her, and she has been invited. It just genuinely didn't work out because around this time people like to throw out that she was banned. So I checked in. She
don't believe she was banned, but I mean I do believe having a voice who's contrarian, the whole platform where what you say goes and you can just shout at people and there's no nuance to these conversations. What does that provide in a larger context when it comes to talking about sports? How does that enlighten minds or get people to think differently or look at different opinions? It does nothing. It does nothing but you get video clips and views. I don't know on a larger scale how things can change because social media has become this, in Twitter especially. Now you're getting paid for the engagement that you're getting. Again, I just feel like, and Cheryl said this too, there's enough people like her, like players and coaches and people around the league who value what it is and what it still can be, and without all this nonsense aside to it. As far as taking a break, what I said, I do believe the next rookie class with Paige Beckers and more people coming in will help bring in more fans, but also shift some of these pockets of division that we're seeing, because there'll be more to talk about and more spread around. And then the class after that, really time. I think it's just going to take time.
Do you think the solution, definitely time, but also more coverage moving forward? Because we've spent a lot of time talking about First Take, and as a football fan, if I want good football talk or good football analysis, I don't go to First Take. I know where I can get good football or good NBA analysis, and it's not First Take. And I've noticed, more WNBA podcasts popping up. I've noticed, ESPN devoting more time in its typical NBA Today slot to talking about the WNBA. I don't know where the WNBA stands when it comes to advanced analytics and things of that nature. But I guess on the other side, you are going to get more content aggregators. You are going to get more clickbaity articles. So there's some push and pull there. But do you think more coverage is a good thing or a bad thing for the league?
No, I definitely think it's a good thing. And I think another frustrating thing about all this is that more media companies are getting in on this. They want a share of the engagement that clicks, but they don't want to invest in good quality content and analysis. Like you said, they don't want to pay full-time staffers and support them. We only have a few beat writers with each team that exists in this league right now. That's going to have to change. There is more room for more podcasts and more analysts. There's room for women's sports history to be talked about on a larger scale. There's there's space for this coverage, but media companies are going to have to buck up and invest and spend the money to do so. If they, if they want to continue and head down this road where it's going to increase and get bigger and better, content aggregation will only do so much. I think, and I see this in conversations with people. People get tired of it. They get tired of engaging in this way. Eventually, you hit a wall. But I do believe it's needed. Like you said, WNBA Countdown, their viewership, their numbers have gone up, and that's a quality program. That's a high quality program, and we need more of it.
I think that's a great place to end. I do want to just shout out, Deep Blue and iHeart's slate of shows. I think Sarah Spain's done a really good job. We've covered it quite a bit here, and they're going to continue to expand, not just in basketball, but in other places. And they, I got to be around some of their launch stuff around WNBA All-Star Weekend when it was here in Phoenix, and they seem to be, it's not just an attachment to this or some trial project. It seems to be a very genuine and real investment. So that's the type of thing we're talking about: permanent, real, invested in types of coverage. And yeah, hopefully time. I mean, right now you see a lot of, just to speak to some of that aggregation side of it, a lot of it is just they're treating this league like a culture war right now. It's covered the same way that, something Donald Trump says is going to be covered. It gets aggregated in the same nonsense way that is so detached from sports, which is, in my opinion, pretty unique. Like, you see the occasional Brittany Mahomes stuff in the NFL, but you're also going to just say a highlight of a great catch. And that part is almost absent in the mainstream coverage. It's a lot of just the nonsense, which
that's what I think has been interesting is Caitlin, by all indications, lived up to these unrealistic expectations coming into.
She surpassed them in my book.
Right. Yeah. And that's somehow become a footnote in the entire conversation whenever we talk about
it's
her.
Also doing a disservice to what she's done this year. I mean, that's what her play, the numbers she put up, the records she broke, amazing. And yet that's becoming secondary to all this other nonsense, to her getting poked in the eye accidentally by Dejanay Carrington. And now it's become, part of the culture war. Yeah. How many times have we seen players poked in the eye in the course of a basketball game? It blows my mind. And it's, if you are a true Caitlin Clark fan, I'd be frustrated on her behalf that she is getting, her talent is getting surpassed by this other nonsense.
We can and will continue to stay on this topic. There's no shortage of tentacles that have come out of it. We'll go into another college season, and before we know it, it'll be the WNBA once again. The postseason is still going on, though. We'll see who comes out victorious and what the attention and storylines end up being as we continue through October. Thank you so much for joining us, Lyndsey.